Hello, everyone. Today I'll be discussing how the United States' recent tariff policies under President Trump are reshaping global business decisions. Companies across the world are reevaluating their investment plans, adjusting their supply chains, and facing rising uncertainty as the U.S. trade rules shift at an unprecedented pace. Since Trump's return to the White House, the administration has rolled out a wide range of new tariffs targeting almost all major trading partners. And as a result, U.S. tariffs are surging to levels not seen since before the Second World War. Many observers believe we are witnessing a major transformation on how global trade will function going forward. For companies, the biggest challenge is the unpredictability. Tariff announcements shift rapidly, sometimes weekly, along with sudden threats and policy changes. Foreign governments are trying to prevent trade wars, but the inconsistent direction from Washington makes long term planning extremely difficult. Even America's closest partners, Canada and Mexico, have faced new tariffs. These are imposed despite a prior trade agreement negotiated under the same administration. When the U.S. cut off discussions with Canada that were meant to ease those tariffs, it only heightened uncertainty for companies on both sides of the border. Adding to the predictability is a major Supreme Court case evaluating whether the president can rely on emergency powers to impose many of these tariffs. If the court restricts this authority, the administration will have to find alternative legal avenues, which creates even more uncertainty for global businesses planning long-term investments. Beyond the broad tariffs, the administration has targeted specific industries. Automobiles, metals, and certain consumer goods now face steep tariff rates. These sectors rely heavily on international supply chains, so even a small change in tariff policy can dramatically affect cost and sourcing decisions. Major companies are already reporting significant financial impacts. Automakers relying on North American supply chains expect losses in the billions. Nike projects a $1.5 billion cost increase by 2025 because a large share of its products come from Vietnam, which is now subjected to a 20% tariff. These changes are forcing companies to rethink pricing, sourcing, and inventory strategies. While tariffs raise cost, there is a clear incentive built into the policy. Companies can avoid certain tariffs by committing to U.S. investment. For example, when the administration threatened a 100% tariff on chips, companies like Apple were told they could avoid these penalties through domestic investment. So Apple subsequently announced $100 billion in expanded U.S. operations. Pharmaceutical companies were told that imported branded drugs might face tariffs unless they built manufacturing capacity in the U.S. In response, companies like Pfizer and AstraZeneca reached agreements with the White House. Pfizer secured a 3-year reprieve by pledging lower drug prices and increased domestic investment. AstraZeneca committed to invest $50 billion in U.S. manufacturing by 2030. With tariffs affecting cost structures across industries, companies are aggressively redesigning their supply chains. Some are shoring production to the U.S., while others are seeking alternative manufacturing locations to diversify risk. Supply chains are no longer being designed for efficiency alone. They now must accommodate geopolitical uncertainty. Looking ahead, the Supreme Court decision will be pivotal. Even with that ruling, the administration has already shown interest in using sector-specific tariffs as bargaining tools. Companies operating globally will need strategic flexibility, scenario planning, and more diversified supply networks to remain resilient. So, in summary, U.S. tariff policy is driving a major shift in how companies invest and where they produce goods. Uncertainty continues to be the biggest obstacle for business planning, but companies are adapting, whether by increasing U.S. investment or restructuring their supply chains. These changes will influence global trade for years to come. So there has been an update since this article was written at the end of 2025. Since the publication of the article underlying this presentation, the U.S. Supreme Court issued a landmark ruling on February 20th, 2026. In a 6-3 decision, the court held that the International Emergency Economic Power Act, also known as IEEPA, does not give the president the authority to impose tariffs. This ruling invalidated the broad reciprocal tariffs and trafficking and immigration tariffs that had been implemented under IEEPA. The court emphasized that tariff authority is a taxing power reserved for Congress, and that IEEPA's language permitted the president to regulate importation, does not include imposing duties. This decision opens the door for businesses that paid IEEPA-based tariffs to seek refunds. Some estimates suggest the federal government may need to return up to $175 billion in unlawfully collected duties. Immediately following the ruling, the administration announced it would shift strategies by implementing new global tariffs under Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974 and initiating new Section 301 trade investigations, signaling a pivot towards alternative statutory frameworks for trade actions. This ruling significantly reshapes the tariff environment discussed earlier in the presentation, limiting unilateral executive tariff powers and creating new uncertainties around refund mechanisms and future tariff structures. Thank you, and this concludes my presentation.